God, what a mess. As my kids like to say, I do not like this timeline. I do not like it at all. And yet, here I am, and lacking the power to alter the space-time continuum, here we are, doing the best we can to navigate chaos, outrage, anxiety. Now, as many of you know, last spring I noticed that I was holding my outrage, fear, heartbreak, anxiety in ways that were wearing me out. I started to see signs of burnout, could call it compassion fatigue, outrage fatigue, chaos fatigue, call it whatever you want. The truth of it is I got really, really cranky. Luckily, I noticed the feelings early enough that I don't think I lashed out in ways that were inappropriate. And even more lucky, I have this amazing job where when I'm starting to feel a little crispy, I can go to my board and say, I'm starting to feel a little crispy. Do you think I could take a couple months of sabbatical and go get my head back on straight? And the board says, of course. And then the whole congregation rallies to cover my responsibility. Well, I travel and spend time in nature, and read some books about doing activism in healthy ways, and journal a lot, and meditate a lot, and do yoga a lot, and spend time with family and friends, listening for love's marching orders all along the way. And the great news is that it worked. Since I got back from my mini sabbatical in October, I've really been holding things differently. I still pay attention to what's going on in the world, but it doesn't land the way it used to. It doesn't take residence in my body. I don't feel weighed down. I'm not constantly fighting despair, anxiety, that sense of heaviness and helplessness. My aunt got me an Apple Watch for my birthday, and so currently I'm obsessed with my sleep score. I got a 99 the other night. Like, who even gets a 99? Never mind a woman in her 50s with I have an autoimmune disease. My joints are always, I have no idea how I'm pulling this off. But it makes it hard to answer the question when somebody comes up to me and says, well, how are you? Because if I say I'm actually doing pretty well, I worry people will think there's something wrong with me. Am I not paying attention? Am I in denial? Am I being selfish or naive? Am I hiding behind my privilege? Why am I not completely freaked out? But if I say, I'm scared and anxious and outraged, which is also true, right? Then I'm not doing my job. I'm not regulating. I'm not staying grounded and present. I'm not embodying hope. So this week, I opened up those books again. The Empath's Survival Guide by Judith Orloff. All of these I recommend. Social Justice for the Sensitive Soul by Dorcas Cheng Tozin. And I think maybe my favorite, The Four Pivots, which I just shared as one of our readings. And I'll say more about that in just a moment. And what these books affirm is that successful activism, being a good person, relies on self-awareness, a commitment to personal growth. To keep going, if we want to make a difference, we need to know what kinds of things feed our spirits, and we actually need to invest our time and energy in doing those things as well. So Gandhi, you might not be aware, had a huge fear of public speaking, and he regularly felt overwhelmed in large crowds. And so he had to spend time pulling away from people and going into retreat. And Martin Luther King loved telling jokes. He was known as a practical joker. His wife once described him as being playful as a 6-year-old. So when Gandhi and MLK made the choice to retreat or to laugh, to do the things that fed their spirit, it didn't send them into paroxysms of guilt and doubt, clearly. They just did them. And while as human beings they were far from perfect, no one can deny they were very effective as change agents. So what makes it confusing is that it feels in my body like I care less than I used to. It feels as if there are limits to my caring, and I don't want there to be, Part of me thinks that to be a good person means I have to be this inexhaustible fount of caring and compassion, that I need to have limitless energy to work for justice. But the reality is I've got limits, and so do you. And our founts, those founts, they are without a doubt exhaustible. We all know it. In fact, I need to regularly replenish my reserves in order to have founts at all, especially in these times. So can we remember that the sense of overwhelm is in part a deliberate strategy to keep us off balance, to keep us from being effective? They call it flooding the zone, and they are doing it on purpose. I have this image of being in a giant gymnasium, and there are all these machines launching pickleballs at me. All these balls flying around in various directions. And, pickleballs, if you don't know, they're wiffle balls. But if they hit you, they still hurt, right? And if I'm not careful, I'm going to spend all my time running around, spinning around, paying attention to who's getting hit and where, running everywhere, every which way to try and help folks. Or I can make the decision to stay centered, to be clear about how far I can run and how fast, and I can be strategic. I can choose to respond physically only when I can actually get there in time to make a solid hit. I can focus on my breathing. I can keep my knees soft, my weight on the balls of my feet, ready to move, but not wasting energy. I can notice what's happening over there in my peripheral vision, and also stay focused on what's right in front of me. So I can follow what's happening in Minneapolis and feel the rage and the horror and the anxiety without letting it pull me off balance. And then I shift my focus and I look for what I can do here and now. I can send money. I can post stands, flyers. I can spread the word about protests and vigils. I can put a candle in my window, whatever feels good and right. Then I let it go. And I trust that I've done my part and that everyone else is doing their part. It doesn't help to push past my limits. I'm more effective if I respect them and stay in my zone. So does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm trying to explain here? Self-care is not self-indulgence. Nor is it bath bombs and tea and binging Netflix, although those things can be part of a person's self-care. Self-care is treating ourselves with love and compassion before we try to give to others. It's about putting our oxygen mask on first. It's listening to love and discerning what we need to stay grounded and hopeful, and then doing those things. It's not denial. It's not hiding behind privilege. Self-care is a way of being our best selves. It's a way of maximizing our potential to act for love in this crazy world we live in. There are limits to our capacity to care. And it turns out we're better off respecting them than we are pushing past them. Because how we do things matters as much as what we do. And here's where the 4 pivots come in. So Sean Ginwright, who wrote the book, is, as I mentioned, a professor at Harvard and a leading voice on healing leadership and social change. He's also a dad and an activist, and he's very down to earth and honest and open about his own struggles. And he plays basketball, so I think for him in the gymnasium, it's basketballs flying all over the place, not pickleballs. He writes, "We're all trying to figure out ways to live, work, and play while making the world better. We need a fundamental shift in our values, a pivot in how we think, connect, act, and work. A pivot is a small change in direction from a single point where we are. It means that through one small change in direction over time, we can get to where we want to be. A pivot is not a complete abandonment of what we know, but it braids together what we know with how we feel and who we wish to be. In basketball, a pivot requires 4 interwoven and seamless traits. When a player has a ball, they pivot in order to advance the ball down the court. This pivot requires that they stop momentarily and reflect on what is happening. They have awareness of the relationships and the other players around them. They maintain focus on the goal without distraction, and they calmly and confidently flow into another direction. Now, his 4 recommended pivots all focus on the how of activism, and they are a pivot in our awareness from a lens to a mirror, which involves the practice of self-reflection and exploration of who we are as individuals. A pivot in our connections from transactional to transformative relationships, relationships that cultivate deeper human connection through vulnerability, empathy, and listening. A pivot in our vision from problem fixing to possibility creating. And a pivot in our presence, our way of being, from hustle to flow. Do you want me to read those again? Okay, and then I'm going to go into a little more detail. So, lens to mirror, a shift from thinking about what's out there to reflecting on who we are. Transactional to transformative relationships. So instead of looking for the ways what people can give us and what we can give, we look at how we can grow and change. Pivot in vision from problem fixing to possibility creating, and a pivot in presence from hustle to flow. Okay? It's a really good book. It's easy and accessible to read, so if you are struggling with any of this, I recommend it highly. Now, this first pivot from lens to mirror is all about how we perceive and understand the world. We evolved to recognize patterns, and we have the whole body of the social sciences to help inform our pattern making and understanding. Only things are always more complicated than the patterns and categories we create to make sense of them. So Ginwright suggests we pay less attention to why other people do the things they do, and more time developing clarity around what we do and why, so that we can make more deliberate choices that are in line with our values. Now, I've spent countless hours reading articles that report on voting patterns and social and economic shifts, the psychology of fill in the blank, MAGA, white supremacist, mass gun violence, isolation, women, men, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's all very fascinating, and I'm sure that there are grains of truth in all of it, but my attempts to understand why other people do what they do feeds dangerously into my own desire to control or manipulate, which is a fear-based tendency. In my experience, fear-based strategies always backfire. Meanwhile, the time I have spent, also countless hours if I'm being honest, reflecting on and understanding my own interior landscape has granted me a greater capacity to speak and act deliberately and mindfully and with integrity. I think the nicest compliment I ever got was when a therapist told me I was the most self-aware person she'd ever known, and she had nothing more to offer me. Complimented and abandoned in the same moment. So self-awareness keeps us in the present, open and curious and responsive to reality. It grows our capacity to answer those 3 questions we had in our children's story, right? When is the best time to do things? Who is the most important one? And what is the right thing to do? Ginwright begins the chapter on the second pivot with a quote by Benjamin McBride. The wrong first question is, what do we need to do? The right first question is, who do we need to become? He goes on to talk about belonging, about weaving webs of kinship, about all of the ways our relationships change us when we allow other people to matter to us. So we can argue facts and statistics about racism all day long and it won't make much difference, but when someone we care about, someone who matters to us, is brave enough to share their life has been impacted by acts of racism, Our innate capacity for empathy kicks in. Our whole body resonates with the knowledge that this just isn't right. And those moments happen to everyone, regardless of where they are on the political or social spectrum. Those moments are the ones that move us forward as a society. Now, we can't force people to share their stories. We can't force people to listen. We can't force people to let folks who look different than they are matter to them. But we can work to constantly expand the network of people who matter to us. We can choose to listen. And we also can calmly and bravely, setting whatever boundaries we need to set to stay safe, we can also work on being more vulnerable and open with the people that we matter to. This is love's primary method of healing the world's brokenness. And it is slow and it is messy, but it is effective. Sorry, allergies. The third pivot from problem fixing to possibility creating especially resonated with me with regards to the question of what should we be doing about Christian nationalism? Now, I get asked that question all the time, from international journalists to people who corner me in the grocery store. It's one of the consequences of being a visible religious leader in the same town as Christ Church. And to be honest, I'm super tired of the question. However, I've given a lot of thought to my answer, and I'm pretty happy with it. The best way to fight Christian nationalism is to focus on articulating and living our values and making sure we're visible in the public square. In other words, instead of being noisy about what we're against, we should be noisy about what we are for. Now, talking about how horrible Christian nationalism is, which, don't get me wrong, it's pretty awful and not remotely in line with actual Christian values. Christian values are kind of up on the walls, but anyway, that's a fear-based strategy. So instead, can we invite people to imagine with us the possibility of a world where people are free to be who they are, love whomever they love, and worship in the ways that work for them? That is a beautiful vision, a beautiful possibility. Maybe we could even get over our tendency to shy away from theological language and evoke the possibility of an unconditionally loving God, to counter the judgmental and controlling version taught by conservatives. Maybe we could talk about a Jesus who fought for the outcast and the marginalized, a Christianity that centered on love instead of tribalism, and maybe we could name those actual values at the heart of Christianity, which are really the same as the ones hanging on our walls. Jen Wright says, our job is to lean into the practice of possibilities and strive for the future we want to create. I know it's really hard, given the urgency, scarcity of resources, and limited time, but if we are in the business of making deep change, we also have to transform what we believe is possible. It's really the only way. We have to recognize how oppression limits our vision and predetermines our actions and go at it in a different way. The fourth pivot from hustle to flow is my favorite. I've been talking about the feeling of flow with my spiritual director for a long time. And when I talk about being in flow, do you know what I mean? Right? So Jen Wright defines it as the state of consistent, focused, and nearly effortless activity that consistently produces desired results. Flow is the state of awareness that is free of judgment, doubt, fear, and confusion, and is guided by a sense of effortless certainty. Hear that? Effortlessly. It's a very embodied feeling, and it's hard to put into words, but when I'm in flow, I'm centered, I'm fully present, I have both clarity and curiosity. The choices that I make when I'm in flow always seem to work out. And so I've had a personal goal to stay in flow as much as possible for, years now. I first experienced flow only during times of incredible stress. Somehow, when I had more to do than I could manage, my judgment and fear and anxiety would melt away, and I'd just do the things without overthinking. I used to talk about how the universe would just pile on challenge after challenge until I stopped trying so hard and surrendered and followed my instincts. But being broken by overwhelm is frankly a really miserable way to get into flow. So I've spent the last decade and more learning how to find flow, how to keep it, and how to find it again when I've lost it. And again, it's hard to put into words, but for me, being in flow requires regular spiritual practice, radical acceptance, staying fully present in the moment rather than rehashing the past or imagining the future, letting go of control, which is a big one, and trusting my intuition. It's about quieting the monkey mind, and in particular, the voices of self-judgment and self-doubt that have me overthinking every decision. One of the most important signposts that helps me find the path of flow is joy. When I want to do something, it feels effortless and easy. Doing things I don't want to do is like trying to fight against a current, trying to swim upstream. And don't get me wrong, sometimes we have to do things we don't want to do. That's adulting. But when I prioritize the things that are joyful and easy, I get more done overall. So that's going with the flow. I also have to remind myself regularly that being in flow is like walking on a tightrope. You don't find your balance, you don't find flow and hold it rigidly. You have to find it and lose it and find it again with a million micro adjustments. So, putting myself back in that gymnasium, pickleballs flying every which way, what I'm looking for is that feeling of flow, trust, focus, effortless certainty. It's a little ironic, but we're maximally effective when we understand and honor our limitations. We get more done when we slow down. Our influence expands when we narrow our focus. The mess of the world doesn't need people who are frantically running around trying to fix all the problems. It needs people who are grounded, self-aware, curious, connected, and in flow. And it's our job to be that kind of people. And the way we do it is by listening to love. Love will guide us. Love will lead us. The truth of it is that we're facing problems of a scope and magnitude that we can't think our way out of, no matter how hard we try. So our best hope is to stop trying and start trusting and imagining and living into the possibilities. If we honor our limits, if we can learn to care without trying to control or fix, if we can stop carrying it all in our bodies, then together we'll create the world that we're dreaming of, where every child grows up safe and accepted and loved, where every adult is supported and free and becoming and being their best selves. The world where we're existing in harmony with nature and the planet and its people are not just surviving, but thriving. You in? So be it, and blessed be.